pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the first item on the agenda?
Yes, ma'am. The next item on the agenda is ID 4423, Capital Improvement Program, CIP, debt affordability, and other budget-related items.
Today, we have with us our presenters, City Financial Advisors, Mr. Joe Mason and Ms. Jen Dirksen from Davenport and Company. You may come forward.
Rhonda, is there a way for the record, this is a joint meeting with FAC, and I see that we have attendance from FAC, so how can that get in the minutes, because they're in the audience? I just want to make sure that for the minutes, it's acknowledged that FAC has joined the meeting.
Okay.
Maybe just by me saying that.
Thank you, Alderwoman Tierney, Chair of our Finance Committee. I understand we have FACT here today. Do you all have a separate presentation, or I guess it's okay? Is this combined, or is this combined with ID 4423?
Excuse me, the presentation for you was from our financial advisors, Davenport, not FAC. FAC has been invited to this meeting so that they can take a closer look at the CIP and debt affordability. So they were on the invite, but these are our financial advisors.
Thank you, Ms. Dickinson. I just want to give everybody a piece of information. At the end of our work session today, we're going to leave 15 minutes for a no-harm presentation as requested by our Chief of Staff, Ms. Pettit. So thank you so much, and good afternoon, and welcome again.
Thank you so much. Good to see some familiar faces and some new ones. So by way of reintroduction, I'm Joe Mason with Davenport and Company. I've had the good fortune of working with the City of Annapolis for about 16 or 17 years as your financial advisor. To my left is my colleague, Jennifer Dirksen. She's been with us for about 6 years and has a background as a senior rating analyst at Moody's Investor Service, which is one of the rating agencies that the city carries a rating from. So it's very familiar about how this particular topic, debt capacity, debt affordability, how that factors into your credit ratings. So this presentation is something that Ms. Dickinson has wanted to have done annually around this time as you begin consideration of the CIP and the budget, just as context and sort of a framework for how much are we thinking about borrowing for the CIP now and into the future, and is that something, are we borrowing at a pace that is manageable and sustainable within our adopted financial policies, which we've recommended and you've adopted, but those policies are forever subject to revision and review because the rating agencies themselves change their criteria periodically. We still see no reason to change them now, so the policy metrics that you'll see and consider and hear are still valid and good. And with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer to take us through what I think is a pretty short presentation. But by all means, if you have questions along the way, we're here to answer them. This is your time, and feel free to interrupt us as needed. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And good afternoon. As Mr. Mason mentioned, we're here to just update you on your annual debt capacity. And in this review, we look at both the city's existing debt, so debt that's already outstanding, as well as proposed debt under the upcoming CIP for fiscal 2024 through 2029. And the reasoning looking at this is to see how your debt service as a percentage of expenditures aligns with your policy of maintaining between 10 and 12% of expenditures. Sorry. As Mr. Mason mentioned, this is extremely important to the rating agencies. Your current policy to maintain debt service as a percentage of expenditures is at 10 to 12% is in line with industry standards. And really, this is just a measure of how much is being spent of the annual budget on debt. And so the higher that percentage, the less flexibility a local government has. So in this chart below, if we start on the left-hand side, that is your existing debt service. So that's what's already outstanding for bonds that you've issued. The second column, as we move over to the right, is new debt service. So this is estimated debt service for the bonds that are proposed in the current CIP for fiscal 2024 through 2029. And this is assuming a conservative interest rate of 4% for fiscal 24 and then 5% thereafter. And so if you add the existing to the new debt service, then you get the total debt service, which is that third column on the chart. And then we look at that total debt service number that we came up compared to general fund expenditures. We are using the estimated fiscal 24 general fund expenditure in the current proposed 24 budget, and then we're growing that by 1%. And that 1% is also very conservative. In looking back at what was last year's presentation, expenditures actually grew around 9% instead of 1%. So that's a very conservative assumption. And you can see here that you all remain below your 12% upper threshold and even the 11% midpoint. And you can really see this on the next page in the chart here. You can see your three different thresholds, the 10, the 11, and the 12 shown in different colors on this chart. And you remain below that policy midpoint. And it's only in about 2 years that you actually even cross that 10% threshold. For the remainder of the period, you remain below that 10%. So you're in a very strong position, even with the conservative assumptions that we've taken. If we turn to the next page, this is really just showing how much future capacity you have, but only taking into account your existing debt. This is not yet accounting for anything that's been proposed in the fiscal 24 through 29 CIP. And you can see here that we've shown how much the city could issue under the 10% policy target, the midpoint, and then the 12% policy ceiling. And you can see that that ranges somewhere between $79.6 million at the 10% level and $107.2 million at the 12% level. Now, if we turn to the next page, this is just an overview of the proposed borrowing in the fiscal 24 through 29 CIP. And you can see that it totals about $45.1 million on that top line, the proposed CIP amount. Then we have that second line, the borrowing amount. And the only difference between the proposed CIP amount and the borrowing amount is that for fiscal years 24 and 25, we've included an additional almost $7.8 million in issuance because those are prior approved but unissued bonds. So, and we've done that in the past as well. And so you can see that the total over the 6-year time frame, adding that in, is about $60.7 million. And then finally, this last slide here shows your additional debt capacity. This is taking into account your existing debt, as well as that $60.7 million of proposed debt that we just talked about on the previous slide. And so you can see that after you issue that $60.7 million, this provides you with an overview of each of the policy levels, what additional debt you might be able to issue under each of those thresholds. So under the 10% policy target, you'd have about $22.3 million in additional debt. And you can see that you wouldn't be able to issue under the 10% policy target till about fiscal 28 or 29. When you going up to the 11%, that increases to about $36.3 million. And then finally, under the 12%, you have about $50.1 million in additional debt. That being said, it is our recommendation that you don't necessarily go up to the 12% policy ceiling, where the city currently is projected to be, below that 11% midpoint and mostly below the 10% policy target in most years is very favorable position to be, particularly in how the rating agencies view the city. So with that ends our short presentation on debt capacity, but as Mr. Mason said, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I have just one other point I'd like to conclude on. This analysis assumes that you adopt the CIP as proposed and that the projects proceed in the timeline and the borrowing occurs on the timeline that's projected in the CIP. What happens for most local governments is projects tend to slide a little bit, and your finance office does a really good job of matching up the timing of your borrowing to when the money needs to go out the door. It's very much a priority for Ms. Dickinson to not borrow well ahead of a need, because there's no reason for you to be paying interest on something when the proceeds are sitting there and the projects aren't ripe. So the CIP is a document, but it's a document that's going to change from year to year, and things could slow down. Conversely, if something happens, life, safety, health, or otherwise, something could speed up, but know that it's a little bit fungible. That's all I wanted to add. So I understand there are a couple of questions.
So, Mr. Mason, if something happened within the fiscal year, there's enough flexibility within this that we're okay.
That's my assessment.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. He answered my question. Thank you.
Alderwoman Tierney or O'Neill, any questions so far?
Mine was, I was just trying, maybe it's a Director Dickinson question. I'm just trying to reconcile the debt number to the operating, those respective line item. Where would I see that debt in the capital budget? Because there's bonds and this and that.
Tell me if you're talking about debt outstanding, or are you talking about
Debt for 2024.
debt payments?
The debt that he's using to calculate.
All right,
whether it's
so-
10 or 12%.
Yeah, so the numbers start from a couple places. Existing debt, you could see that from looking at our debt payout schedules, how much we currently owe, what the timing is of the payment. For the projected debt, we take a look at the CIP. And within the CIP, there's funding sources.
Right.
One of those funding sources is bonds, and we're looking at general fund bonds, as well as any capital, the equipment capital leases that are paid through the internal service fund. We don't have any new leases there. But for new bonds, if you look at your CIP and you look at the 24 column and you look at these out years, that's where they draw the initial debt to be issued from.
Okay.
And if you want me to, I can tell you the page numbers, or you want to try to look at that yourself. If you look at, let me see, there's a page on here that explains where the amounts come from. There's a note on page, what's the name?
Are you in the capital improvement budget? Or, yeah.
There's a note that walks you through where all the CIP numbers come from too, I thought. Okay, so if you go to, on their presentation, you go to their page 4.
Yep.
All right. So you can see there the city planned CIP and borrowing from this is what you would see in the CIP for bonds.
Yep.
Plus, that small note on the bottom tells you that of the amounts that you see in the CIP schedule that are prior approved, you approved those in the 23 budget and prior. We haven't sold the bonds yet because the projects are not, all the projects don't proceed as scheduled. So there are some bonds within that column that have not yet been sold. So I recommend to them that they assume that those prior approved but unsold bonds are going to be issued over the next 2 years, in 24 and 25. So they build that into the model along with the 24 bonds, the 25 bonds, 26, et cetera.
So you have to go through every project and delineate. I know I'm in the weeds here, but you have to delineate whether it's you take out the grants.
So if you look
separate
at
out the grants.
these
Yeah.
summary pages at the beginning of the CIP,
Yeah.
there is a summary that groups them by type.
Oh. that's-
So on
good for
one of
you.
those pages, and I think that's what Katie was just walking over here with, if you look at page 10,
Oh, yeah, there they are, yeah.
yeah, if
Okay.
you look at the top line. So if you start reading that note there with the asterisk by it, the amount for fiscal year '24 includes the $9,895,920
Yep,
from the 2024 CIP, and then that prior authorized but unissued piece, and that's how they came up with the amounts that you're seeing in that table there. And so that guides you through it, and the rest of the 26 through 29 should tie exactly to this page. Yes.
okay. So I could take the total capital budget and just for evaluating some kind of funding exposure, if you will, I could do a pie chart of bond versus capital reserve, et cetera. Just
Yeah.
because, yeah.
Yeah.
What I'm
And
getting
keep-
at is that the
And
grants.
keep in mind that this model you're looking at is a general fund-based model, so the
Yeah.
stuff that's going to be repaid by the enterprise funds is not considered in this
Oh,
model.
true.
So as long as you
Watershed.
focus in on those of your pie chart, you would just use general fund pieces, and those are all delineated here as well.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Alderwoman O'Neill, do you have any questions so far?
So many questions. So many. So the way I read it, if we pass the CIP as it is currently, that strangles us a bit for any borrowing for about 3 years, correct?
Assuming that the borrowing occurs at the interest rates that we have used in the analysis, which is 4% for the upcoming fiscal year and 5% thereafter, and assuming that your budget over the next 3 or 4 years only grows by 1% a year, which has not been your historic trend in the last 5 or 10 years. You've been growing at a multiple of that.
I think you said
9% was between last year and this year, correct?
So the faster the denominator of that ratio, which is your general fund expenditures, grows, the more capacity you have.
okay.
So we've deliberately constrained it to show you a conservative look at your capacity.
And that one analysis, let's see what page it was on, tells you that if we issued as programmed, as estimated, there's a little bit of capacity left in the early years, which I think somebody else asked this question. On page 5, there's some 2024 capacity left. Even in this very conservative model, there's a little bit left. But yes, we wouldn't recommend going any further in those out years. But every single factor in this model is conservative.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Oh. I don't think that, I'll check with
Can
Mr. City Attorney.
the member of the FAC
member
get
of
up and
the
ask some questions as well?
Sure.
Okay,
Whatever you
all
want.
right,
Do you want to go stand over there?
Work sessions.
okay. Good to see you.
Okay, there we go.
Button.
Good, it's been a while. Just for the record, I'm Bob Burden, Vice Chair of the Financial Advisory Commission. My understanding, this is a joint meeting of both the Financial Advisory Commission and the Finance Committee of the City Council. So I do have a couple questions. I think that you perhaps answered one of them, and that is that you're very conservative in only projecting a 1% growth in the expenditures for the city of Annapolis.
That is correct.
Quite obviously, I don't think I've ever seen a 1% growth here in the city of Annapolis. And for the last, 14 or 15 years, I've been looking at this. This graph pretty much looks the same. You know, that bubble just kind of moves down because we do experience anywhere from 3.5% up to 9% growth. So that does give additional capacity, as you mentioned, when the previous question was asked. So when we take a look at these numbers up here, as I understand it then, given if the city's expenditures would grow 3.5%, 4% next year, then there would be additional capacity. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, but that additional capacity, also recognizing that the city council, or that the city itself, is faced with somewhat of a structural deficit that's going to need to be addressed. If we were to take advantage of that additional capacity, we'd also be adding additional expenditures in terms of covering interest expense and stuff like that with the operating budget and so forth. Is that your understanding?
Did you want to respond?
No, you can, I just said, we don't deal with Davenport, so there, when we say structural deficit, we have ARPA monies still that are unused that we're going to use for operations, and we've got them plugged into the budget for the next couple of years. And what he's referring to is when that is used up, you know, everything's growing. Okay, so there.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, your question was, if you took advantage of the additional capacity to borrow additional money, would you have additional expenditure outlays for that? And of course, the answer to that is yes. If you're taking on a debt, you've got to repay the principal and the interest. As to whether or not it would change the overall proportion of your budget depends on how much additional capacity you have and how much additional debt you borrow for. It might not change much the ratio of debt to the overall budget, and it probably doesn't have any meaningful impact on this operational issue with the ARPA funding, you know, eventually being wound down.
Then that brings me to my next question that I have. Given that we're looking at debt capacity as it pertains with the ratio to general fund expenditures. As general fund expenditures go up, debt capacity goes up. In other words, we can acquire more debt. In your experience, when you work with other jurisdictions and with other municipalities, are there other formulas other than tying debt capacity to general fund expenditures that you've experienced?
Yes, another common debt policy that we see is debt to assessed value.
Okay.
But I would say that debt service to expenditures tends to be the more restrictive of the two policies in most cases. The other policy that not only takes into account debt, but also pension and OPEB liabilities is a fixed cost policy. So looking at all three of those, debt service, pension, annual pension contributions, and OPEB contributions as a percentage of expenditures, so a percentage of budget. And it's just sort of expanding on debt service just to see what the city's fixed costs are overall, and getting a sense of, you know, how much of the budget is. That's also something that we see across the industry and something that the rating agencies have been looking at. But those are the two policies that I would say we see, you know, other local governments potentially look at. But as I said, debt service to expenditures is more restrictive than the debt to assessed value.
Okay, so the city is using the more conservative type of formula.
Yes.
Two other things. I know we have a Financial Advisory Commission meeting tomorrow, but I also notice in our debt and financial administration policies that we have two other ratios that we look at. One is the debt as a percentage of assessed value, which we have a ceiling of 3% on, I think, and with a target of 2%. And the other ratio that we have is the debt payout ratio. Is that correct?
Correct.
Madam Financial.
Correct. And when looking at our debt service to assessed value, you will find that it's nowhere near the 2%. It is
good.
way under. If we ever tried to take on that 3%, we would not be able to cover that debt and continue operations. It's just, that as Jen said, it is just not a conservative policy at all. And as far as the debt payout ratio, that governs when we sell debt, that governs the pattern at which we pay it off. And we set the principal payments to get to a certain point halfway through the debt. Am I right? Is there 10 years? Yeah, 10 years. Is it 50%?
That's your policy for the state law.
Yeah, we typically have more than that. So we're better than our policy at how we time it out. They want to make sure that you don't sell debt and then have balloon payments way out in the future, that you want to get a good portion of it paid off early. So that's why we have that policy, and we always comply with that, and even are better on. Okay. So.
2.
Alderman,
1.
okay.
It's right here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you can read it in the far left-hand column, that's your existing debt service. You can see out past roughly 2028, you have significant drop-offs in the total debt service that you're paying each year, which means you're fairly rapidly amortizing the principal component of that existing debt service, as Ms. Dickinson just said. And you want to try to continue that sort of downward ski slope trajectory of the debt service, because it allows you to have capacity for the future. If you burn up all your capacity now, you're up against it, and something breaks, something happens, and you need to borrow in the short run, you don't want to accidentally trip over that policy. So again, try to amortize as rapidly as you can, consistent with balancing your budget.
Okay, just one final wrap up. So as I understand it then, the ratio that we're using now seems to be the most conservative ratio and the most appropriate and best for the city. All that we need to do is just discipline ourselves that as our general fund expenditures go up, we don't try to start maxing out our capacity. And we be conservative in our assessments as we take a look at what we go to the bond market for and so forth, correct?
That's right. I mean, think of this as sort of the public finance equivalent of a credit limit, for a personal credit card. You could go and ask for a higher credit limit by changing your policy and increasing the percentage, but what's that going to do to the rest of your budget? So, it's the old live within your means, prioritize your projects, and stay within the debt affordability and capacity limits that you've smartly set out for yourselves, so that you can continue to strike a good balance of providing services and infrastructure while sustaining your financial health and, good solid budgetary cash flow. That's really what this is all about.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Burden. Alderman,
Yeah, just a quick question. I'm sorry, I mean, risk management is in my DNA.
that's what we're here for.
So by finalizing this budget, I assume that we've made the decision that city dock financing is not going to need any of our capital reserve because if it did, we'd be closer to the 12%, et cetera. So did we make that analysis and said, well, you don't have to worry about that this year? That the city dock
City dock,
financing
as
is
currently
intact?
programmed, has a chunk of bonds already in there.
Yep.
That are part of this analysis already. However, if we get substantial grants for City Dock, because we're still pursuing some substantial grant funding,
Right.
even if we may not need as many bonds, or in the future, we may need to add bonds, but anything that we currently have programmed in there is included in this.
Okay.
And now, no, actually not, right? They're parking fund bonds. Those bonds are parking fund bonds, never mind, so they're not a part of this analysis. And as of right now, we don't plan on adding any future bonds, expecting substantial grant revenues. But if those don't materialize, we may have to add them in future years. But again, every year we go through this process with bonds that are being repaid by the general fund, and we analyze where we can fit it, what we can do. And if, you know, if it was a large allocation of bonds, we'd have to decide how close we get to that 12 and whether or not we'd be willing to live with that.
And what does our bonding agency look at? Do they look at, make sure that we don't exceed 10%, or what is their evaluation of debt capacity?
Yeah, she's the bond rating agency expert.
Yes, they do look at debt service to expenditures, and 10 to 12% as a policy target is in line with what they're looking for. So the fact that you're pretty much under that 10% for the majority of the years is very favorable for your rating.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, and continue, please.
I think that completes our portion of the presentation. I think you're now on to a briefing on the CIP, if I'm not mistaken.
All right.
So thank you for your time.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Are we ready?
Yes, Director Gerald, thank you so much.
Thank you. David Gerald, Director of Public Works. So I'm going to provide an update on, or a briefing on the capital project for FY24. The purpose of this is not to go over the status of each of these projects, but really just to talk about the financial side of the projects and give you an update on the projects that are going to be funded or requested funding in FY24, and then give a little more detail on the new projects for this year. So we have a lot of projects that are moving through the pipeline. Some of those require additional funding, so you'll see those on the list, and then some are brand new. So we'll discuss both of those. So these are some of the general fund projects. There's a second slide here. But very quickly on these, the Acton Cove Park is a new project that you haven't seen before. This is all grant funded, and that's to do rehabilitation work down at Acton's Landing Park. The Annapolis Gateway project, this is the park that's located on state and federal land along Robb Boulevard, right behind the Archives building. And we have $73,000 of prior appropriations, so this is additional money to move that project forward. And this is actually a mix of grant funding and capital reserve. The Solar Park Pollinator Garden project is new, and that's capital reserve, and I'll talk a bit more about that in just a minute. Annapolis Walk Park Improvements is a project that's already in the pipeline. This is a special interest project for Alderwoman Finlayson. So we're adding $472,000 of bond funding to this project to do additional improvements over the ones that were originally envisioned. And that's construction costs. So we're moving into construction on that project this summer, actually this spring with the basketball court. Bay Ridge Avenue Sidewalk is an existing project that's located out by Bay Ridge Gardens, over by the Shell Station. So we've done some planning on that. and we need to add an additional $105,000 to move that project forward. That's a difficult project from a number of aspects because of real estate issues, and also there's BGE poles that are in the way, but we're working through those. City Dock Resilience, so that's the big City Dock revitalization project and resilience. We're adding $11 million additional dollars because the costs have gone up so significantly. We had $41 million in last year. That's about a $54 million project. We are still very optimistic that we're going to raise the money. The state, this legislative session, added another $3 million. So we're up to about $44 million that we have for that project. The Resilience Finance Authority is now stood up, and they're looking at providing funding. They were originally created to help fund this project, so we expect them to contribute some money. And then this project is a perfect fit for FEMA funding. So we anticipate that FEMA is going to contribute a big chunk of money to this project as well. Cedar Park sidewalks, I know this is Alderman O'Neill's favorite project. We're adding, so the $84,000 is just to supplement about $380,000 that we have in there. We're moving through the design phase on that and expect to go to construction, if it is constructed, probably in the fall or early next year. Facility improvements, this is an annual project that goes towards all of the city buildings to keep them updated. So that's all bond funding, as is the city Cedar Park sidewalks, also bond funded. City facility security upgrades, existing project annually funded, additional $472,000 there, and that is bond funded as well. City Harbor flood mitigation. This is actually for the other side of City Dock, so this is on the Compromise Street side. This was actually the first project out of the box. We have $12 million in that already, but we had a bid bust when we put that out for bids, and the costs came in a lot higher, so we need additional money. That's a mix of a bond and grant funding, and as well as state funding. The Electric Annapolis Mobility Plan is an existing project. That's a mix of grants and bonds. And that's actually, we received a large grant for that project to acquire the electric ferry as part of that project. Fitness equipment replacement is an annual project to allow Pitmore Rec Center to replace their fitness equipment. And that's using, that's Capital Reserve? I think that's Capital Reserve funding. Public water access improvements is a new project to allow us to update some of the water access facilities that we have in the city that are in need of repair. So that is also Capital Reserve funding. College Creek Connector is a new project. That's a path that will run next to St. John's and under State Route 50 over towards O'Berry. So it's an interesting project, and that is a mix of grants and Capital Reserve, mostly grants. Dock Street, or Duke of Gloucester Pier is a new project. The $105,000 is for planning and design bonds to install a floating pier right at the base of Eastport Bridge, just off of Duke of Gloucester. Waterfront access infrastructure is also new, and that's, again, to help improve some of our water access. So this would actually create new locations for water access. The other one would just improve the facilities that we already have. And this is Capital Reserve as well. General roadways and sidewalks, those are our annual funding amounts for both of those, for resurfacing and for replacement of sidewalks. Gibraltar Avenue improvements. Gibraltar Avenue is a private street that we're in the process of acquiring. So this is a new project to allow us funding to actually acquire, to do the legal work that's required to determine who owns that, and then to acquire it and start planning for improvements. Hawkins Cove is an existing project as well. It's currently funded for $537,000, so this adds $124,000 of grant funding to 2 improvements there. Moyer Park sidewalk improvements, existing project. We're going to move into construction next year, so this is bond funding to allow that to be funded. Parks Maintenance Facility is a new project. This would actually fund the replacement of the trailer that's down in Truxton Park with a permanent parks maintenance facility for that group. So this gets that project started, planning and design, $115,000 of bond funding. Pickleball courts, lights, that was funded to the tune of $105,000 last year as well. This adds an additional $105,000. It's all grant funded to install lights down at the pickleball courts in Truxton Park. Traffic safety improvements, this is a new project. This is capital reserve. And this allows us to address the many, many traffic issues that you all and that we all observe out in the city. And the requests that we do, traffic safety investigations we do, and then we always find that we run into a roadblock because there isn't funding. This will allow us to move forward with some of the improvements that are required when we do traffic studies. Traffic signal rehab, this is an ongoing annual funding and bonds. This is a funding that is allowing us to do Church Circle right now. And so the next intersection that we're going to look at is the intersection of Spa Road and Hilltop. So that will be the next intersection that's funded for replacement of traffic signals. Okay, moving on. These are still general fund projects. So Southwood Sidewalk and Stormwater Management is an existing project. It was funded for $52,000 to allow us to start with the design, and now we're adding $367,000 to progress the design. This is going to be a large project. It's going to be a multi-million-dollar project after we get it designed, so that's coming in the future. Spa Road Sidewalk it's a fill-in from Hilltop down towards in front of those apartments that are along Spa Road. Towards town. So again, a new project that allows us to start design. Trail Connections is an existing project. This is additional funding and bond funding for that to try to provide trail connections in accordance with the bike master plan from about 10 years ago. Truxton Heights storm drains, $2.9 million for construction. We're wrapping up the design for that project. This is more of a water conveyance, flood mitigation project than it is water quality. So that's why it's in the general fund instead of the stormwater management fund. And that's all bond funding. Tucker Street boat ramp, that's funded for $318,000 now, and we need to add additional money for construction. Undergrounding overhead utilities, the state keeps giving us year after year funding for this. It's moving slowly because we just don't have capacity to move that forward, but this is an additional $262,000 from the state to pay for that. That's going to allow us to underground all the overhead utilities in the area of East Street and Maryland Avenue and Prince George and Fleet and Cornhill, and that whole area is what the vision for that is. Senator Elfreth keeps getting money for us. So we've hired a consultant, so they're going to start program management for that, and we'll get that moving forward. Waterway improvements is an existing project. It's funded right now for $366,000 in grants, and this adds another $63,000 of grant funding. Waterway improvements, a new project, again, grant funded for $52,000, so we'll start the design for that project. Thompson Street is a new one. We had DNR funding for that project. They came and did an inspection and found that it's not navigable right there because it's silted in, so they pulled their funding. Still needs to be done, so this is bond funding to allow us to do that project. Waterworks building improvements. This is capital reserve to allow us to sort of kick off, start planning and design for future reuse of the waterworks building. Both the old plant that's down by Waterworks Dam, as well as the recently deactivated water treatment plant up above, right next to the new water treatment plant. Williams Whalen Field, we need an additional $100,000 to complete the study of that and potentially to start putting the 2 feet of fill over that so that we can get that open back up. And the last general fund project is the West-East Express Bikeway. That's already funded for $865,000 in grants and bonds, so this adds an additional $545,000, again, grants and bonds for that project. Okay, enterprise fund projects. So these are the water, sewer, stormwater management, parking projects, as well as transportation. So Goss Garage elevator replacement, that's an existing project that's funded for $252,000. We're adding $315,000 of funding from bonds, and that will be paid, those bonds will be paid from the parking fund. Parking access control is also an existing project that this adds. We have $157,000 in bond funds now, and so this adds $172,000 for that project. Parking lot or parking garage and lot improvements is a new project. It's going to be pay-go from the parking funds, $115,000 to get that project started, and that's just similar to the facility improvement project. This is just going to be funds available to do parking garage and parking lot improvements. The charging infrastructure for EV vehicles at transportation, this is a new project, bonds $556,000. We're getting new electric buses, so we need the charging infrastructure to go with those. Sewer rehab, this is an annual allotment for relining sewers, so 125 or 1.25 million. That's both bonds and pay-go. We've tried to move more towards pay-go for our water and sewer projects, so this continues that. Water distribution rehab, again, that's the annual allotment for our water projects, and this, again, is a mix of bonds and pay-go. Water tank rehabilitation, we do these as needed as our water tanks require updating. So this is $700,000 of bonds and pay-go for that project. We're doing water well improvements out by the water treatment plant. Again, this is sort of an as-needed. We've spent about $840,000 in the past. This is an additional $315,000 for one of the wells out there, and this is bonds through the water system. Stormwater management retrofit projects. So these are storm drain improvements. So storm drains fail and need update. This is an annual amount of money that goes towards that. And this is bond funding from the watershed restoration funding. And finally, the MS4 compliance, $1.5 million. This is added to the $6.6 million that we put towards these projects in the last few years to allow us to continue to do restoration projects to meet our MS4 goals. So this is both bonds and grants. So I'm going to turn over to Katie or Jody to talk about where all of the funding is coming from.
So on the screen, it looks like there's just 24 funding. 40, is that 46, David?
46.
Yeah, 46. So if you go to page 10, your capital budget book, this gives you a breakdown of general fund, the funding summary. So we have about 9.8 million in bonds, 2.6 million that we're using from the capital reserve, and the rest is going to be grants. So the majority of it, as you see in 24, is going to be grant funding.
Okay.
At the risk of adding too much information, when we have these projects, if we put cash in there from the capital reserve fund, we tap the cash first, and then we use bonds, so we're not borrowing until we need to. Grants, we typically save those for the end because they're on a reimbursement basis, so you need to spend a lot of funds in order to ask for your reimbursement back. That's just a few comments on how we seek reimbursement. We will start sending reimbursement requests as soon as we have eligible costs, but because you have to match costs, those tend to drag. So just a comment on how we use our sources. And I think Katie said these are all outlined on page 10 in those summary sheets that I pointed out when Davenport was doing their presentation.
So this slide is going to walk you through the 24 funding for the enterprise funds. Off-street parking, the total is $587,000. $472,000 of that is going to be bonds. $115 PAYGO. Transportation fund, $556,500 there. You can see that the negative $400,000, that was for the transportation roof project. What happened there is we thought we were going to get grant funding, and we did not. So that needs to go forward. So we have bond funding currently programmed for that. Kwaku and Marcus are looking for grant funding there. The refuse fund, if you remember, that's the landfill project. We completed that project. So that de-appropriation amount that you see there is because the project is done and we didn't need the full funding. Sewer fund, 1.2 million there. 875,000 of that is going to be bonds. Water fund, 5.3 million there. 3.6 of that is going to be bond funding. Watershed restoration fund, 2.5 million, it's 1.7 total, 2.5 of bonds. And then we had to take back some PAYGO there. Jody, if you want to elaborate further, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. In the Watershed Restoration Fund, we're taking back some PAYGO from the previous year. It turns out the model that they were using was using cash in the operating fund and cash in the capital project fund that had already been moved over. So they were kind of like double counting the cash. And we could see that this year. We had been PAYGO funding all the watershed projects for years, and they weren't moving forward. So it was building up cash. So we were using that cash to fund what capital projects they did have. And we decided that when we could tell that we had utilized too much, and so we're going to take back the FY23 PAYGO, substitute bonds for that, and then use mostly bonds for next year and the next couple of years until we replenish the actual operating cash balance. So that's why you see that unusual adjustment there.
Okay, so we'll quickly preview the new projects for this year. So Acton's Landing, the waterfront park down there, this is grant money from the state. This was an unsolicited amount of funding that the state provided us without our request. But as you can see from the picture, there is flooding down at that park during heavy rain events, so that will address that flooding by improving the storm drain system, and we'll replace the boards along the dock there and do some other upgrades. So it's money that will be well spent. The pollinator garden out at the solar park. So it's planned to do this over 3 years. There'll be initial planting. We're hoping next spring, next summer, and then follow for 2 more years after that. We're using capital reserve funding for that. Public water access improvements. I mentioned before that this is to improve our current facilities that are in need of some loving care and some funding to upgrade them. So the initial ones will be Tolson Park and the park at Weems Creek. College Creek Connector, this shows the alignment of that. So this is going to allow us to get started with the design. Actually, the design's already started, the preliminary design, so it will continue. And $315,000 of this is from grants.
Which has a question too?
Did you want us to wait to the end?
Do you have some project specific?
I just had a question about the last one.
The one before?
I can wait if that's easier.
Sure.
So public water access improvements, are these adding new facilities, or are they maintaining?
They're maintaining existing facilities, and we also have one that will add new facilities, but this one is to improve existing.
Okay, so that's why it's using capital reserve funding. Okay.
Did you want to say anything about College Creek?
No, I think Alderman Savage just had a question on the last slide. So.
Yeah. Is it?
So I want to just, if I could, say something about College Creek Connector. We are going to connect it beyond that to the end of Northwest Street as well. So we'll go around the other side of St. Anne Cemetery on College Creek. Delegate Dana Jones pulled down $100,000 from the state for the kayak dock there. So that will be connected to the Stanton Center or operated sort of through the Stanton Center. So there'll be some improvements there. And so we'll connect 2 communities that aren't connected now. So we'll connect Stanton and Northwest and West Washington Clay, and then it'll connect Bloomsbury Square. Bloomsbury Square always blew my mind that we had all the money in the world to build Bloomsbury Square, but there's not a view of the water, there's not a pathway to the water. In fact, there's a fence in front of it. So I think when this gets finished, and I think it's eligible for some good federal dollars, that's going to be a great asset to leave the historic district and go out towards the Severn River Bridge and ultimately connect onto the B&A Trail and to Baltimore, to Arnold, all those areas. So and West Annapolis as well. Sorry, Alderman Savage.
So yeah, I think that's a great project. Just if we go back a second, just wanted to clarify, because I'm trying to remember the use of the funds. I always get them mixed up. It's capital reserve. Is that for one-time use? Because I know some of them had restrictions on if they could be used for general maintenance or not, or if it needed to be non-routine.
So in general, we try not to use bonds for anything that's not going to be a 20-year asset. And we will, if we are starting a project and we don't know what kind of assets we might create, we tend to put capital reserve fund monies on them, because it's going to cash fund it until you know that you're going to build something that's going to be a long-lasting asset. So that's in general. And in addition to that, some projects are a combination of long-lived assets and short-lived improvements, like painting. That's a capital reserve fund type expense. The smaller items, we try to fund those with the capital reserve fund monies. So that's the general rules, and then I'd have to address any specific project.
Well, I guess, can you explain your thinking on this one in particular? Because if it's if it's maintenance of our existing facilities and not adding brand new facilities, shouldn't that be just covered with operating?
It should be. So if it's maintenance, these shouldn't be maintenance, these should be capital. So capital means that it extends the service life of the facility. It doesn't just maintain it to allow you to realize the service life. So maintenance should be part of the operational budget. Improvements or major repairs where that you're actually extending the service life, which is what we intend to do for these facilities, should be capital.
So, yeah, so I'll give you, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, and that's sort of the difference between the one-time and the capital. Capital are true capital expenditures that we use for the capital reserve. If it's less than capital, then you can use one-time if it's just a one-time maintenance or whatever, a one-time purchase.
I mean, it's not a lot of money, but it just seems like it's more maintenance, one time, or routine maintenance that needs to be done. It just makes sense.
Neil?
This particular park, Tolson Street Park, was a new park that was dedicated last August or September. And it was my understanding that the funding was going to partially to the study to get that water access. It's currently not a water access park. There's a old path that is somewhat cleared, and when I was with Rodney Dillard and Archie back in January, it was determined that it would be viable to talk about getting it down to the water. So it's not a maintenance issue. It's creating the park in this one.
Improving a park, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
At the time, it was told to us that Rexon Park had the approximately 5,000 in its budget to do the initial study. Is that not the case? Or is that-
It could be. You know, they certainly don't have this amount in their budget to do it, so this augments whatever they have.
Okay, thank you. That was just clarification on that. It is a brand-new park, and it does not currently have water access.
So I'll clarify what I was meant by maintenance. I'll give you an example, and this is a better example than what I had said earlier. The pool. We constructed the pools, right? But there was some furniture as a part of the project. These smaller, shorter lived that are going to wear and tear, they're part of the project, but those are the types of things we would put the cash funding on, not the pool construction itself, which was mostly grants and bond funded.
Okay, moving on. Duke of Gloucester floating pier. I mentioned this. This is at the base of Duke of Gloucester at Compromise on the Eastport side. There's sort of a gate that's there now, so this would create a floating pier and access to that floating pier. So this will get us started with the planning and design for that project. I don't know if the mayor wants to add anything about that. It would be open to the public, yeah.
So if you come past the wall at St Mary's and you get to the fence there, there's an opportunity to create an overlook, and then you could be at that overlook, and then you could go down some steps to a floating pier. And when the boat show happens, we lose the whole Ego Alley dockage for boats, and then everybody piles into Prince George Street, which is a very small dock. So we need a bigger dock that has the same capacity as Ego Alley for the 3 weeks that we lose the boat show, and that's a very walkable location for it. Enrique? Yeah.
So will it be for boats and paddleboards, or will the public be able to, like, say if you just wanted to walk in, sit or whatever, is that acceptable as well, or do you have to be renting a slot?
Yes, the overlook should have a bench in there, maybe some art, and there's also a design that I just saw that has a little kayak beach as well, and you could bring a kayak in and just paddle in and just leave your kayak on the beach and then walk into town as well. So, and a mural on that little wall.
Gavin, is this where the living shoreline is going to be? Or is that
I
further
just
up?
saw an image from a company that took a look at it, and they did a kind of living shoreline beach idea, so it stops erosion and.
But the living shoreline that St. Mary's is doing is going to be just, you see that wall that's existing is to the right of that.
on the other side,
Yeah, on
yeah.
the other side, all the way around St. Mary's. All right, so this is 84,000. This is a new project, as mentioned. So this is actually the one that's going to address the condition of our bulkheads and docks, ramps, and so forth, to do improvements to those as well. Gibraltar Avenue is the privately owned street that's out on West Street. What's the name of the school that's out there? Monarch. So all the Monarch parents use that to access the school. It's a private street right now that we're in the process of researching to see how we can acquire that. And Mr. Lyles is working on that for us. But this will be a multi-year funded project to improve that street. It's going to have to be rebuilt, and it's going to have to be taken all the way down to the sub-base and rebuilt. It's going to have to be widened to meet city standards. So funding will come in subsequent years for that part of the project. That's the existing trailer that Parks Maintenance uses out at Truxton Park. So we're going to replace that with a permanent construction building, long overdue. The plan is for, in the interim, until their new building is complete, that they'll move into the old Public Works facility on the west side of Spa Road and use that temporarily while their new building's being prepared. Spa Road sidewalk, as I mentioned, the infill sidewalk between Forest and Hilltop. Traffic safety improvements. Again, this is after we do traffic studies and identify issues that need to be addressed, this will allow funding to do that. So this will be an annual allotment of funds for traffic improvements.
Alderman Savage?
Thank you. Just a quick question on that. Last year, I had gotten a budget amendment passed for a crosswalk on Edgewood Road. I couldn't remember though. Was that coming out of this fund or?
No, that was actually put into our Public Works budget. So we're going to try to get that done before the end of the year because that was operating money.
Thank you.
Yeah.
While you're on Edgewood Road, the sidewalk as well, that's going to be this year, you think, or is that still?
That's an existing project that's still working. So we've asked for additional money for that project. That's the Ellen Moyer Park sidewalk.
Right.
So that's still working. Okay, as I mentioned, this is going to be similar to our facility improvement annual allotment, only this is going to be for parking garages and parking lots all from the parking fund. And then EV charging infrastructure for our new buses out of transportation.
Alderman Gay?
How much? Where will that be at? The EV stations?
They're going to be, they're going to be at ADOT out there. They're going to mount them, I think, inside one of the bays of the buildings out there. There's going to be a couple of them, so, yeah.
Thank you. Alderman Gay?
Okay. I had a couple other, just like quick ones. Is the August Drive Primrose Spa updates included in the general sidewalk and signage fund, or? So
that would be depending on what's required, and we still have a bit of work to do, and we need to talk with you about what we want to do out there. But that could come out of the traffic safety improvements fund, because that's exactly what we want to use that for. Is after we do these studies, we'll have some money available to be able to implement the recommendations.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And the Bay Ridge Avenue, I was wondering because I did see the land acquisition, so I'm assuming he wants us to purchase that. If it's
I'm not sure he wants us to. I think we'll need to.
We'll
if we
need to,
want to put
okay.
sidewalks over there. They've been reluctant to do that because we've tried that in the past.
Yeah.
But we're going to make another run at it.
Does the federal compliance with ADA come into play where the city could potentially not have to purchase it, but just use,
I don't think so.
is it eminent
No.
domain when you're able to just take the,
Well, that's always an option. So Mr. Lyles can address that. That's always an option if they're not willing to sell and we need it for new sidewalks. That's an option. We can also, the code says that it's the adjacent property owner that's responsible. So it allows the public works director to go to a property owner and say, you have to install this, and if you don't, we're going to do it ourselves and charge you for it. So we have that option as well.
and it's only a couple of feet, correct? It's just to the end of,
It's that section.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you answered the park maintenance facility update. When they're in the Spa Road site and if a developer is interested in that, would they have a backup space or?
We'll have to find them one. Yeah. I think for it's going to take a few years to get that property ready to develop. So hopefully these projects line up where the project out at Trucks and Parks is complete and they can just move in there and then we'll be ready to sell.
And I think that's pretty much it. I thought this was a very, very good distribution of the capital improvement funds across the wards, very equitable. I'm happy, my ward's getting some shine, and so I appreciate it.
Tierney?
Oh, I'm next. I'll just ask this as a general question, and I sort of touched upon it during the Finance Committee review. You mentioned, Director Jarrell, you mentioned bandwidth. And I see in some of the new projects, there's allocations. It appears there's not much construction, but most of the new projects, it says design. So is your staff tasked with that?
Yes.
So that, you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, so in the past, when we were putting new projects in, we would guesstimate what the cost was. So now we're putting money in for planning initially. We're not putting dollars in for design and construction. So we go through that whole planning stage, including conceptual design
Yeah.
and preliminary cost estimates. So we have better estimates in future years. So these that we're just funding planning, we'll come back next year with better estimates of what the design's going to be, what the timing will be, and what the construction costs will be.
Okay. Could you walk me through Cars Beach, for example? There's nothing appropriated in the fiscal year 2024 budget.
Yeah, that's right, because that was all appropriated last year.
Right.
So that continues. That's like many projects that are
Right.
still working their way through.
But
So
what activity would be going on then in fiscal year?
that needs to be planned. There hasn't been any of that. And the earmark that we got from Senator Cardin is for development. So that will fund that effort to do the planning and conceptual design and master planning and all the things that have to be done. Hopefully we'll be able to acquire the Morse property, so that would actually be more intensively developed than what Cars Beach will. But we definitely have things in mind. We have a limit on the time for the $2 million that we got for the development, so we have some ideas of things we could do. Beach replenishment, for example, or improvement of the parking lot across the street, some things like that are going to need to be done at some point, but also to develop a master plan.
When we receive grants, for example, the undergrounding, well, that's kind of a weird one because it's from the General Assembly, but don't the grants stipulate time deadlines, or we have to be cognizant of the terms of the grant?
They do,
So-
and they're all reimbursable, and they all have to actually be formally applied for. So they put them in the budget, but then we have to apply for them and get them, and the Board of Public Works has to formally approve our application, even though the legislature's already approved them. So it's a process to go through, but yeah, they do have time limits that we have to meet.
When we get them, they'll have.
When they expire if you don't if you
Right.
haven't used it.
So they want to see construction going
Yes.
on? Okay.
They want to see progress.
This might be for the city attorney. I saw that we're doing a property purchase, forget which one. Monticello and West Street. Have we thought about purchasing that property? Should I put in an amendment to buy? No, we're not at that stage yet, or?
What's there?
That's that old gas station.
Oh, that's 245 West Street. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
we
how I know
were
it.
doing a appraisal. and
We did an appraisal of the property, an assessment of the cost, and we provided that number to the administration.
Okay.
Can you share it?
Yeah, $1.9 million to buy the property. And in order to effectuate the purchase, we'll have to send that number, which by the time we send it may or may not be the new number, but it was 1.9 as about 60 days ago. And we have to alert the owner that we're going to take the property by eminent domain, give them the opportunity to take the $1.9 million. And if they accept that, then we pay, and it's pretty quick and painless. If they don't, then we'll have to sue them and go to court and get a jury to decide the amount. And then after the jury decides that amount, then we make the payment and move to take over the property with a court order.
So should I ask for anything in the budget?
That's up to the administration. Our job was to find out the amount that it costs, an appraisal, plus the environmental remediation that would be necessary because it is a gas station. And there will likely be some expenses related to litigating on this matter, somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000 to $300,000 to actually do all the work necessary to litigate. Because that wouldn't be covered by a self-insurance fund. That would have to be an aggressive affirmative litigation that we undertake against the property owner.
Is the developers doing the same kind of effort? Are the residential developers, are they pursuing it anymore? Like Bozzuto or whoever? I don't know.
There's nothing going on at the property right now.
Gosh.
And the owners are very hard to catch up to and nail down.
So we haven't really done this very often, but we're trying to motivate them to do something about the site. It'd be a tough thing to pull off, but there are plenty of private developers that want to do that, so I think we will have options if it comes down, but I think it's very premature probably for money to be set aside.
Sure.
Do you think so?
Was there any, just last question on that, is there any opportunity to ask the LLC or whatever for any sort of temporary use? We can use it any sort
We couldn't even reach the property owner to tell them we were going to enter the land and do the assessment.
Insurance issues,
After multiple attempts to do that in various ways, including through registered agents and others. They just didn't respond. So we made the decision to go ahead and just enter the property and do the full assessment. So it's up to the administration of the city what it wants to do with respect to eminent domain.
What a waste. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Sorry.
Just quick, this is fantastic. I hope that seems very cheap to me for prime real estate in the city. A similar thing happened in Silver Spring, where the county government was able to take $4.1 million of their dollars and enter into a TIF with a local developer. And they built 162, obviously they had, much more density leverage, but they built 162 condos sold at workforce prices in Silver Spring. So the average condo, I think, was being sold for about $180,000 or $190,000. The city made their money back in a year and the county made their money back in a year and a half because the units sold so quickly. And they're still obviously in this TIF, and they're still generating revenue because they still own and maintain the land. And I think of that with Spa Road as well, just an opportunity to create revenue for the city, but also provide services for citizens. I think is a fantastic idea. And
So when you do eminent domain, don't you have to have a reason to benefit the city, and that benefit would be workforce housing? And is that the argument?
Well,
I
there's
mean,
a
to take
not-
time, but,
it has to be a public purpose.
okay,
And a public purpose could be whatever the legislature and administration decides is a public purpose.
okay.
Most of the laws around eminent domain center on taking land for purposes that provide everything from economic value to the citizenry, to housing. But in the past, most recent past, it's mostly been those things that would provide some kind of economic viability to the city, to produce space for a factory or produce space for some kind of business concern to come in and hire a lot of people. But it's whatever you decide, as long as it benefits the citizens.
Savage?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And yeah, on that topic, I am working on some legislation with Cynthia regarding essentially a gas station moratorium / phase out, so we don't have to worry about getting new ones. And in this case, since it's not an active one, it might be one way to phase out that use at that site. And we can talk more about that. And just in general, for this is probably my favorite part of the budget, because these projects I think are really, it's really tangible for people to see as far as.
My favorite part too.
Yeah. As far, yeah, sure. Yeah, people can, I think, easily see these improvements as opposed to the rest of the budget. It's all numbers. And also as a project manager, I can appreciate all the incredible amount of work that your department's doing on these. We keep giving them more and more. So a couple questions. So one possible budget amendment I'm thinking of would be regarding Edgewood Road. We've talked before about exploring options for speed reduction. Would that be appropriate to come out of, I think you had the traffic safety?
Traffic safety, sure would. That's exactly the type of projects that should come out of that.
All right, we can talk more about that
Yeah.
later. As far as the city dock flooding, what'd you say, 17 million or something around there? And
Yeah,
is that for the pumps only, or does it include the new wall that's going to be
So that-
incorporated into new city dock?
it's that total of 54 million for the Dock Street side is for everything. So it's to take out the parking. Let's see if I can get back to that. It's for the flood wall. It's to raise the elevation. It's to install the green area and the fountain.
Okay.
It's to build the new waterfront welcome center. It's for everything. 54 million is complete for that.
What's the difference between that and the city dock resilience to 11 million?
So the city dock resilience is the one we were just talking about over on the Dock Street side. The city harbor flood mitigation is on the Compromise Street side. So that's for the pumps and at the Green Street Park and the new storm drain that's going to run down Newman Street to discharge. Realignment of all the storm drains over on that side.
It's a lot of money. So does the that contingency fund go to one of those? Because wasn't it like a 10 million?
The concession
something, or
payment right
concession?
now is for the city dock resilience. So that's the big one on the other side.
And is that on the sheet? I haven't looked yet.
Yes, it's on the sheet.
Is that listed as grant funding?
So that's just the tranche for FY24. There was a big tranche of money in the FY23 budget.
I guess we're considering that grant money on the CIP sheet.
So there was $41 million put into that in FY23. That includes the concession payment, plus the $10 million from the state and some other funding. The cost for that project's gone up, so that's why we've added the additional $11 million for that.
I guess where's the concession listed in the CIP sheet?
If you're on page 22 of the capital budget book, it looks like we had a little bit of a formatting error on here. It says payment. It's in prior approved. It's 11.8 million.
Page 22.
Page 22 is the detail, not of the presentation, but of your capital budget book. Page 22 is the page that shows the
Oh,
City
I
Dock
see.
Resilience Project. And if you look at the bottom section of numbers, you'll see all the funding sources. And within that, you see this line that's called payment, and I think it's supposed to say concession payment, but like Katie said,
Oh, I
I
see.
think we have an issue there.
11.8 million.
So it's 11.8 million, and then as you spoke, Alderman Gabe made a comment about, is that all? But we took a lot of that concession payment and we repaid the debt. That gave us the concession payment so we could have lower interest rate.
Wow, okay, so that's 41 plus 11, so 52, that's 52 million alone for City Dock Resilience, and then there's the other,
Correct.
Right.
then there's the other, so
There's the other
something
side.
like 60
Yeah.
some million, right?
Alderman Savage, can I add something in
Yeah,
here
yeah.
that we feel really good about the federal money that we're chasing, that there's going to be more, lot more money on the way. But I always like to put it in perspective by saying, go see the Farragut Wall at the Naval Academy. It's about a little bit longer than Ego Alley, maybe twice as long as Ego Alley if you go around the corner. And in that condition, they have none of the challenges for construction that we have. So we have to construct around events and boats and people and all that sort of stuff. The Farragut Wall, just that small section, $36 million for that project. And they've got the rest of the academy too. So,
Yeah.
and that, they can pull a barge up to that. They can fence the whole area off. They have really none of the challenges that we're going to have to do that. And they're not building something back beautiful that we're going to build back. So that put it in perspective for me. And I can't believe these numbers either, but it is mind-boggling to think, what's ahead for us.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right, and just a couple more. The waterway access improvement, does that include anything with Wells Cove?
No, it does not. So we have money in our budget this year to do the improvements to Wells Cove to improve the walkway.
Okay.
But with the court ruling, we'll have to figure out what we need to do with that.
Okay, and can we put in there or somewhere else, or do we have it as far as this electrical issue in Spa Creek at Chuckson Park? It's been many years now. I know that people haven't been able to track down, neither us or BG have been able to track down the source. Should we put in money to get some kind of contractor to?
Perhaps, yeah. We got a recent recommendation from Clint to do some work on the dock that's there. Because it's potentially, and we've done all of the things that we needed to do a couple of summers ago to address that. So, but he thinks there's maybe some replacement of some of the parts and pieces of that dock to help improve the situation. We don't really think that that's the source. We think it's from other docks that are out in the area, but just to be completely sure, he recommended. So we're looking at that to see what the cost is going to be and what we could do with that.
Well, there's only one dock in the area, and it's Spa Cove, their old
Over on the other side.
Spa Cove Apartments
Yeah,
on the other side of the ramp.
yeah.
It could be them because that's an old facility. All right, but thank you. Two more questions. The waterworks, I saw there's money in there. What was that for again? I missed that part.
So that's to start a process of finding a good beneficial use for those old historic buildings that really should be preserved. But since they're in the water fund right now, our ratepayers don't want to have to pay to keep up buildings that don't serve any purpose for the water system. So that allows us to do some planning and to maybe issue an RFP or an RFQ for developers of those buildings to. Remember a few years ago, there were some potential users and they thought it was too expensive, and so they kind of walked away. So we want to revisit that again and see if there's opportunities to reuse those buildings and improve them in the process.
Okay. And last question on the Moore property, is that still in the
So on the more property,
Consideration.
the valuation came in at 1.25. With the funding sources that we had, the type of funding only will pay the amount of money that is allowed, that it's valued at. And so we're stuck now. The property owners want 1.5. So, but I think that the Chesapeake Conservancy is coming up with some creative ways to bridge that gap. I pushed hard on the county for $500,000 in this upcoming budget, in the county budget. It wasn't in their initial budget. It's not going to be in their initial budget, but Lisa Robian and Pete Smith are pushing for it because, we're part of the county. I don't feel like we asked for much, but if we had $1 million in the bank, I think we would be able to find a way to get there on the 1.25 to 1.5. So they're working aggressively at it. We should hear something. I did want to point out, I was out on the water today over there, and Burr Vogel, if you've ever been there and you see that big septic in the middle of the beach, and we were there with Matt Fleming from DNR, previously from DNR, and they pointed out that septic tank used to be on the land. So the big concrete thing in the middle of the water now used to be part of the beach. So there's a design that we're going to look at, it's like a crab claw, and you bring this crab claw around and you would know more about it than I do, but it would give us the ability to protect the beach from erosion and then build out the beach so we can relocate that and then not have the erosion and then make that part of the park. And it's been successful in Havia de Grace or somewhere like that, and they did a few versions of that, and now it's kind of one of the most visited sites out there, a really beautiful park that a lot of people go to. So we've got a great team on that, and we've got money ready to develop it, but the key to it is is getting the more property so we can rehab the piers and create something special as a visitor center. So.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, Lamar Jackson is staying with the Ravens.
What's that?
Lamar Jackson is staying with the Ravens. Woo! Newsflash.
Savage.
Sorry to interrupt.
Alderman Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Likewise, a great distribution of projects throughout our city. Thank you, Mr. Gerald. I really appreciate it. I have a question for Alderman Savage, and Alderman Gay had to kind of remind me. Your legislation possibly regarding gas station moratoriums, throwing the baby without the bathwater, I'll preface it with that. An opportunity to have a wonderful food establishment in a truly food desert in Annapolis, but it comes with a gas station. Is that something that we should totally dismiss? Oh, wow, my goodness. Do you eat every day? Fresh fruits and vegetables?
I'll point to Joe Biden's goal to have EV, what was it, 2030, I think, to have all new vehicles be sold be EVs. Unless they're willing to incorporate a huge EV component, mobility component, I think it'd be better.
Oh, I think they're willing to do something along those lines. So I think a food desert is extremely disheartening for the people who live there and have not ever, well, no, the one that left. But anyway, Alderman Gay and Alderman Shannon, I had a meeting yesterday, so just wanted to run that by you.
And can I just add also, Alderwomen, and I was thinking about this last night, it might also be the perfect opportunity for the mayor's pedestrian bridge. No, seriously, that location and this group, that we're talking about is prime location for, you don't want 500, 400 pedestrians walking across Forest Drive every day. You need a pedestrian bridge. So it's a win-win for everybody.
Hallelujah.
But I'm not going to discount a food desert. I think that's huge. Okay, thank you.
So big thank you, Dave. I know, and these projects have been in the works for years and years and throughout our first term. And I think what's exciting, these things take all these things have been done by finding grants to plan them, and then finding money to build them, and that stuff takes years. But in these next few years is when we're really going to see the fruits of those things, and visible change is going to be happening, have happened by the end of this term. So thank you for all the amazing work on that, though. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next up, Kate and the No Harm team. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Jody. How we doing? Good?
Okay, good afternoon. Doing good. Thanks very much for fitting us in today, everybody. We're here to talk to you about the No Harm Violence Prevention Program that's being implemented by the Mayor's Office this year. And with me today are our two of our No Harm officers, Adetola Ajayi from the Mayor's Office and Corinne Makel, who is one of our community engagement people working on the ground. And do you want to? We'll give them an opportunity to tell them more about themselves as we go through the presentation. Just before Tola and Corinne take us through, I'd like to provide a little of the background and the framework that led to the creation of No Harm. This program, the Mayor's Office first piloted a violence prevention program in 2021. That was the first iteration of the No Harm violence prevention. In 2022, we approached the county health department seeking to partner with them and their gun violence intervention team to see if we could further develop this model in Annapolis. We worked with them throughout the year to look at ways we could, the county health department was very concerned with having a data-driven health model of violence prevention, and Tola then researched to find some of the more robust models that are out there that we could use. And he identified Cure Violence Global. They are an organisation that is a global leader on adopting a disease prevention model when it comes to gun violence. We partnered with them last year to conduct an assessment in Annapolis. As many of you know, many of the council participated in that assessment. And the assessment found that there was certainly need in Annapolis and identified a number of communities that would be ideal for their kind of model, but also found that there was a lack of capacity on the ground to deliver true violence disruption. In the meantime, sorry, lost my mic. As we were partnering with the county last year, the council generously agreed to fund $80,000 to us to engage in that work. When we got to the end of the year and through the assessment, and the county was not in a position to continue funding at that point, we agreed with them that we would use that money from the council to engage in capacity building, and that we would target a local community of need that had been identified in the assessment, and we would not only work to introduce a violence prevention program, but that we would work on the ground to build capacity to lead to a true violence disruption and interruption model. So that's what we have done through the program this year. And the last 2 points I want to make is that, you know, the Mayor has obviously had a strong vision, and I know the council shares that vision for a united Annapolis community where everyone knows they're valued and has a voice. There are two key principles that drive the Mayor's Office engagement in these community programs. One is that the Mayor's Office has a strong commitment to building relationships on the ground, and it's a different kind of model that health departments or other service providers sometimes use. And it's really grounded in working with trusted messengers. These are people who have shared lived experience with the people that they're serving. They're there in the community at all times of day and night, and they work on the ground with the people that they're trying to serve. And the other part of our involvement that drives our engagement in this sort of work is that through the Mayor's Office, we can bring a profile, not just to the work and the issues, but also we raise profile in the community. And it says a lot to the communities that the Mayor's Office and people from the Mayor's Office are engaged and care enough to be there. So we see the value of, those are the main values that the Mayor's Office brings to this kind of work. And with that, I will let Tola and Corinne take us through the details of the program.
Greetings all. Thank you for having us here today. My name is Adetola Jai. My position is African American Community Service Specialist with the Mayor's Office. I'm also the Mayor's Office representative on the Anne Arundel Gun Violence Intervention Task Force and on the Opioid Intervention Task Force Senior Policy Group. So I wanted to introduce Corinne Minkle.
Good afternoon. I just want to start off by thanking the council for the amazing internship opportunity that I was given last year, and it's definitely been life-altering for me. I was born here in Annapolis. I was raised in Bywaters. I still currently live there, and I started as an intern for the Office of Community Services, and I had the privilege to transfer to the No Harm team, where I'm actually able to serve the communities that I grew up in. Yeah. Oh yes, my brother was also a victim of gun violence in 2019, and it's definitely been still difficult to deal with the fact that he was walking in our neighborhood and was just at the wrong place at the wrong time.
And I'll just add that I think it's some of those qualities that make Corinne an ideal trusted messenger, because she shares lived experience with the community that she's working in.
Bless you.
Thank you for being here.
It's a privilege. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, so like Kate said, we, from our office, particularly community services, we focused on engagement and building relationships and, having trusted people from the community to do the work in the community. So, I'm glad that Corinne expressed, her personal connection, but also, that's why she was recruited from the office once her, in the process of her potentially leaving from the internship program. I asked her to join No Harm because of the great work she was doing with the OCS department. And just a little background. So our program is evidence-informed, which is different than what most people consider evidence-based. And just to understand that we did a lot of research on local municipalities and local violence intervention programs in these municipalities, particularly Baltimore and DC, and very intensely studied them, reached out to a couple of them, and this is kind of how we launched. This was the information that was gathered to launch the pilot. And after the assessment, working directly with Cure Violence Global, we were able to develop a localized version of what they recommended through the assessment. So can we go to the next slide? So we want to start off just showing y'all what the data has been in the city, in the last 4 years, as far as homicides, contact shootings, and shots fired. Violence prevention is a proactive programming in response to historical community violence. So we particularly want you to focus on 2022. There was only one homicide, which is great. But if you look directly over it, there were 23 contact shootings. So potentially, those were 23 people who could have been homicide victims. And then there were 34 calls for shots fired. And all this information is available on the APD gun violence dashboard. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. So the data drives our work. It's data, and really, this is why we chose Robinwood as our first community to relaunch the program. In 2022, 5 of the 23 contact shootings occurred in the Robinwood community, which was 22% of the contact shooting victims. And the ages of the contact shooting victims in Robinwood in 2022 were 11, 15, 21, 29, and 44. So you can see that that's a wide range of gunshot victims. Robinwood had the highest number of contact shooting victims incidents in the city of Annapolis last year. So again, we're driven by the data and also, the historical violence that has occurred in this community. So, next slide, please. Okay. So I know that people have heard about it, but No Harm is, in this current iteration, is focused on prevention. And when we first launched, we wanted to work on prevention and intervention, and that's where we knew about prevention from our work with NAM, the Naptown Antidote Movement, and that success. But we kind of walked into the intervention world not really, ready for to prepare our staff to go out and try to intervene. And that's what we're looking forward to in a long-term relationship with the county, is develop a robust intervention model, right? But we at this stage are focused in short term on prevention. And prevention is, from a medical standpoint, actions taken to decrease the chance of getting a disease or condition. So when we're looking at violence as gun violence, particularly as a disease, we want to try to stop the spread of the disease by preparing the persons in that environment with the skills and resources for them to identify violence, but also so they don't become victims of violence. And so that model is used with Cure Violence, and that's kind of how we've developed it. But intervention, which we would like to move towards in the long term, is the act of interfering with the outcome or course, especially of a conditional process, as to prevent harm or improve functioning educational intervention. So intervention can also be educational, and that's where we would do the direct person-to-person engagement to persons that potentially could be perpetrators of violence or victims of violence. So.
I'd just like to add, so taking a health model, you can kind of think as prevention as all the things you do to maintain a healthy body or prevent disease or any kind of health impairment. And intervention is what you do when you have that problem on the ground that you've got to deal with and you want to stop that virus spreading. So it's kind of an analogy for ways to think about those.
So our mission is to contribute to a reduction in violence and violent crime in Annapolis overall, right? And how we do it is to reduce the incidence of community violence in the Robinwood community by empowering residents to change community norms in ways that prevent and disrupt cycles of violence. So we empower residents by, particularly with workshops, and then connecting them through referrals to supportive services to empower their quality of life. For example, we've held some financial literacy workshops, conflict resolution workshops, and we, so the next point, developed a trusted network of neighbors within Robinwood that are empathetic, engaged, empowered, and enriched. So we reach out to the young people in Robinwood, the elderly, the adults, and so, because we want to be community focused. We know that everybody's a part of a community, and their call could be potentially a part of the success of the community as well. And so we try to create programs to reach all the age groups and demographics in the community.
And the only thing I would like to flesh out there that we've talked a lot about is in that first point about changing community norms. When you live with violence, you become accustomed to it. So a big part of our prevention goal is to actually start people to interrupt that kind of acceptance and to change those sort of norms. And there's some interesting things the team are working on, and one very exciting project with Hacker that they will talk about in a little bit. And the last one around building an effective model of community engagement is what we hope to do out of this is build capacity by working with organisations on the ground in Robinwood already. So it's not just us coming in to deliver services. We actually want to partner. We have other city agencies, with community agencies on the ground. And our goal, the commitment we've given to the county as part of our capacity building, is that we'll develop a model that can be lifted into any community of need and delivered by any agency with capacity to do that. So that's a big goal for this. It's one of the reasons we want to put some robust measurement and testing around it at the conclusion of the program.
Okay. And Corinne, can you speak about that?
So the purpose of our program is to provide peer support to the Robinwood community through credible messengers who share the lived experience with the Robinwood residents. So basically to empower and employ the grassroots leaders to work in the communities that they grew up in, so that the connection is already there, the trust is already there, and being able to change the mindsets of your neighbors is very impactful. Connecting residents to resources and opportunities that provide alternatives to conflict and violence. So being able to promote growth and critical thinking is very important, especially with neighbors that are, when you live with violence, you become accustomed to it. So we don't usually see an issue with what's going on until we are exposed to greater things outside of the community. Also, being able to build partnerships with community organizations that currently work in the Robinwood community to create alignment and increase the impact. So being able to, a goal of ours is being able to be a bridge, whether it's for organizations to work together more in order to create a greater impact to the community, being able to connect organizations to the community, or even being able to connect the community with more opportunities to be able to, again, promote growth and a change in the mind state.
And I would just say some of the examples of this are the Robinwood Estuary Group led by Downtown Hope. And so we've been engaging with them on how to align different faith organizations that are working in the Robinwood community. And then Corinne successfully has been working with Annapolis Middle School on a movable mural project. And these are just some of the things where we've tried to build capacity with these different groups and show that the city is a valued partner in all these activities going on in the community. Next slide is.
I'd just like to point out on this slide that the one important person in the team is Lavelle Offa. Lavelle isn't able to be here. He actually works full-time in normal business hours, but he works out of hours as part of the No Harm program. So the team operates out of the Robinwood Resource Centre, and Corinne is there during the day and also working out and about in the community at the high school or with other partners during the day. And Lavelle is there in the evening, and he is there to be a resource out of hours and to help, promote referrals and address need in the community at those times. Lavelle also is one of those credible messengers. He grew up in both in Robinwood and then in Eastport, and he had his own non-profit called Small Cities Big Dreams, which was part of the assessment program last year. And the assessment program identified Lavelle as somebody with potential to build capacity, so he was another ideal candidate for our trusted messenger model.
So our program offers a lot of services, informational sessions, engagement activities, workshops, listening sessions, agency and stakeholder meetings. So just being able to, again, empathize, engage, empower, and enrich the communities that we serve are very important to us.
So how we work. Prevention is key. That's, kind of our main focus. I know it's not a very well-funded activity, prevention, but I think, any amount of funding towards prevention is great. So our main goal is to meet people where they're at, meaning that we're going to go in the community. We might have to knock on doors. We'll talk about later what we've been doing at the schools, but we want to meet the people that we're working with where they're at and reduce barriers all the time. So developing community trust, we know that this takes time, this takes consistency, and that's what we've been able to provide in the last 4 months of the program. Empower youth and adults with resources and support to improve their quality of life. Something I always keep to myself, think to myself is that, you know, people don't know what they don't know. And a little bit of information sometimes can change a person's life. So, you know, that's why we want to focus on improving everyone's quality of life in the targeted community that we're working in, which is Robinwood. So our target audience is youth, right? And young adults who need curated workshops to build trust and awareness. We know that, you know, most youth don't, young adults, their brain doesn't fully develop till they're 25. So we do listening sessions, and we held a listening session, but also with our feedback from going to the schools, that helps us determine how we curate workshops, particularly to serve the demographic, the target market. And then adults, they need specific resources and support for themselves and their families. So a lot of the adult engagement is getting them directly connected to resources that they need specifically to improve their quality of life. Okay, families need resource support for the household and to be a part of a functioning community. So you see that our target is youth, adults, and families, but also it represents the community at large of Robinwood.
Yeah, so obviously that's a holistic, you know, that encompasses, you know, the whole community, but we have these targeted activities according to the various groups within those, our target groups within that within the community.
So how we measure our success is through completing all planned program activities delivered. So we, and we'll go into the next slide about specifics, but we have a set number of informational workshops, community engagement activities, listening sessions, also, you know, and then partnered events that we will complete. And then 50% direct household engagement via our community questionnaire. So we've developed a community questionnaire. We've probably done completed about 30 or 40 of them, but it speaks to trying to gather information on how residents feel about their community, violence in their community, and what type of resources support they would like to see in their community. So at least 30 youth referrals, at least 30 adult referrals, and an 80% satisfaction rate via our workshop evaluation surveys. So after each workshop, we give the attendees a survey, and out of that, we want to collect information to find out the effectiveness of the programming.
Just real quickly, thank you. Is referrals a general category, or it's specifically to what referral to?
Well, it's a general category at this point, but then we break it down to say which, you know, where the referral went to or what specific they needed.
Corinne, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the referrals you've done, because you were giving us some specifics the other day?
Yes, so basically most of the questions on the referral questionnaire is asking about.
She wanted to know what type of referrals.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we have referrals from like teen clubs that the teens throughout the community can participate in, working referrals, so being able to connect them with employment opportunities, re-entry referrals, being able to engage people back into the community after they've been incarcerated, and just whatever it is that they need, we figure out a way to get it to them.
And even, for example, connecting people with the rental assistance program with OCS.
And I should mention that OCS is a critical partner in this work, as are other city departments and agencies as well.
And just the last one is just gathering feedback from community partners. Okay. So how we're tracking our progress since the relaunch in January. We've completed one of 2 community listening sessions. We held the first one in January when we launched, and we'll complete the second one in June, middle of June or so. So 2 out of the 4 informational workshops. So the first one was a financial literacy workshop with Michelle Coates, who's currently with the Register of Wills office, and then a conflict resolution workshop with Anne Arundel Conflict Resolution Center. And both of those have led us to now have a series of workshops working directly with those vendors. Okay, 2 out of the 4 engagement activities. So we had a e-game, she spoke about the e-gaming launch, and this is new to the city because the city didn't have an e-gaming program. But but we were gracious to be able to have our youth involved in it. And then we have a Mother's Day event coming up, partnered with Grandma's Touch, and we'll have a basketball component to it as well.
The engagement activities are designed to attract interest and be a lot of a sort of a fun or interesting way for people to come in and interact and not just develop skills, but learn about the program, connect with other people, connect with other service providers. So they have a focus of attracting, people into connecting with us and with the program.
And so we've had, on just the last one, we've had actually 75 referrals. As our goal was 60, but we've already completed 75. So we know that our work is needed in the community and in the school system. So our partners, you got that paper? I can't see that. Yep, thanks. Yes. Collaboration is key when working with limited resources. We have developed several community partners that understand the mission and vision of the No Harm VIP program. These partnerships assist our team in providing a continuum of support to program participants, direct access to professionals in various service industries, and building a credible community support network. So, put the top of our list is Annapolis Rexton Park because they provide a facility use and access to cost-prohibitive ARPD programming. We love the amount of programming at the rec center, but some of them are cost-prohibitive. Anne Arundel Financial Education Coalition, we thank you, Alderman Pendel-Charles, for connecting us. But they've been a valued partner because we know that financial literacy is something that all people usually could use, but particularly those living in low-income communities. Anne Arundel Conflict Resolution Workshop. So we had conflict resolution workshops, again, a series set up for young people and adults. And we had a very successful launch with that series programming, a workshop. We had about 30 participants, and we were able to partner with Wheels for Hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and we gave away 4 bikes during that event. So the HACA, of course, a good partner, allowing us to use. So we are based in the Robinwood Resource Center, substation, but it has limited capacity. So HACA has allowed us to use their facilities when we have our workshops or other engagement activities. And we look forward to having some outdoor summer events as well. And one of our other great partners is Haste 2.0 Clubhouse. And so they have a clubhouse at Robinwood. So they've allowed their participants to participate in our workshops, as well as allowing us to work with some of their youth on different things. Improve their quality of life.
And there are other partners as well who are not listed here. We are working now, building relationship with the APD in particular, to see if we can flesh out connecting people into some kind of formal diversion program. And so, many other partners on the ground. But Corinne, would you mind telling us a bit more about the No Harm Zone project that we're working on with HACA?
Yes, so HACA allowed us to display multiple signs throughout the Robinwood community to just show that there are youth in that community that have dreams that reside outside of the Robinwood community. So just being able to visually display that there are kids always running around could possibly or help prevent as much violence that's going on in the community. The sign says, "Don't shoot down our dreams," of kids playing, participating in sports, dancing, and a bunch of, we'll have them sign it and a lot of fun stuff.
So what we're calling these, and this is something Lavelle actually led, is No Harm Zones. And we'll have these signs posted up in the front and back of Robinwood. And what we want to do is at least have a safe space where the residents can promote nonviolence and bring coming together in peace. So HACA, like I said, we only wanted to put up 1 sign. They requested we put up 2 to 3 signs, and then we'll have an official sign planting day. We'll invite all of you to.
And I believe there's interest in doing it in other locations now as well, because
Yes.
people love this idea, and it gets back to that idea of challenging community norms and just sort of a visual reminder that you don't have to live with violence, that there is a different way to bring your community together.
Oh, and then And the last, well, not the last, but one of the important partnerships we have coming up is with Moms Demand Action. I think it's June 4th, we'll be having a gun
violence awareness picnic at the Pitt Moyer Center.
Yeah, so wear orange.
And the last one to mention is just the partnership that you're developing with Annapolis High, Corinne, and doing the work in the high school.
Yes, so I visit Annapolis High every Monday to meet with the students that live in these low-income communities to just offer them assistance and mentorship with whatever opportunities that they might have questions about, give them more information about other things that they might have interest in, and just being able to connect with them inside of the schools that they're in every day, and being able to give that information also to their friends that live or don't come to meet with us. So yes, being able to work with them and their pathways to peace. I've had connections with a lot of the principals and other staff members there. One, Mr. Kenny Starks, who's the outreach coordinator at Maryland Hall, he was actually a mentor of mine from Bates Middle School. And he has a Hood to Good program that he hosts there on Wednesdays. And he has asked me to speak to his students as well plenty of times. Yeah.
And also, just to add on to that is, and you know, that's why we'd like to continue the program. We've met with the Office of Equity about creating an official agreement where the No Harm team can work with any Robinwood residents, no matter what school they go to. We've already met with the Phoenix Academy. You know, they have a small population of students, but they even, you know, they have about 7 to 10 Robinwood students. So what we want to be able to, you know, have an official agreement with the school system that we can work with all youth residing in the Robinwood community. And also, we're in the midst of developing a strategic program, like Kate said, that will focus on not primarily reentry, but allowing young people to show that they have options beyond what they know in their community.
Thank you. Alderman Gay had his hand up first, and Alderman Savage.
Oh, and and
it's just after 5 o'clock, everybody.
Yeah. Just the last thing is nothing about us without us. We actually found out who said that quote, but I learned about it through Angel Trainer, and I just think that that's a core value in what we do. We want to make sure that the people that we want to work with have a voice in the decisions that are made about their community. So thank y'all.
Thank you. Alderman Gay.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, this is incredibly important to me, not just because it's in my ward, but because it's gun violence, and we continue just to have rampant gun violence in the city. I think we even had a shooting last night, if I'm not mistaken. And I have several questions because I think this is good programming, but it appears is, I don't know, I don't have the right word, and I don't want to hurt feelings, so let me ask the questions. What's the hesitancy to wait on the county, understanding that, and I appreciate you collaborating with them and getting us in the room last year. I vividly remember the meeting at Pitt Moyer. Are they saying they don't have the funding in the health department, or they don't have the funding in general with their $1.5 billion budget? And what's the hesitancy in the city covering the funds in the interim while they get their stuff together?
So to implement the Cure Violence Global model in each location, the budget, the recommended budget is $500,000 to $750,000. So capacity for these programs involves building a trusted network of messengers on the ground who act as violence disruptors. And then it's also the administrative capacity that will be required to manage that funding and report on the program back to the health department. So when we got to the assessment, and with the capacity restrictions and limitations, and also that high cost that Cure Violence Global, outlined, that they estimated we would need to plan for. No, the county didn't have the funding to drive that this financial year. I know that the county executive is very committed to this work, and I believe we can expect something different in FY24. Our goal in the meantime is to simply try and to start, not just, we want to deliver violence prevention, we want to support that healthy body. but we also want to try to build capacity, and that's where the partnership with agencies is so important, so that when the county is ready to invest, we have a community that's ready to go.
So is there an appetite to run a pilot program through the city for this? Or because I think the important thing is, like, this is good and it's great to build community trust, but people are still going to shoot if there is an actual violence interruption. Because, you know, what we're providing right now is community outreach, which we've done in a number of ways. And so there needs to be actual programming, you know, specific to violence interruption, like we had an opportunity to talk about last year.
So we see two critical differences to the program this year. So the first iteration of No Harm was a straightforward prevention program with community outreach and service provision. We're continuing that, but the two critical differences this time are that we are working, well, there's three. We have a round-the-clock presence in the community, and that allows us to better identify the issues and the dynamics in the community. We have, we're working to build these connections with other agencies that will identify, that build capacity and bring them into the work, grow their knowledge, and set them up to be the agencies on the ground that can do the violence interruption work. There was no one was found to have that capacity during the assessment. So that's a critical goal for our program. And the last part of it is that we create a model. So if you've got a community and you know there's violence and you want to do something but there's no capacity, we've developed a model that can be lifted and applied, and this is how we can grow capacity. We are learning as we go through the program, and we're building it out as we go. The program's funded until June, and one of the reasons we wanted to present to you today is we believe if the council is willing to fund the program through to the end of the year at least, and give us 12 months, we can continue to build the program out, and we can build the partnerships, and then we can do a formal assessment and work out how to develop and adjust that model and be ready to, partner with the county and other agencies.
Awesome, thanks. I just have like 3 other questions. One of them you touched on a bit. You mentioned that people are on call. What does it look like, and is there protocol in place if a shooting is taking place? Now, understanding at this point this is a pilot program and it's only in Robinwood. When a shooting takes place in Robinwood, what's the chain of command? What's the processing? I'm assuming if it's during the day, the Karen would show up, and what happens? And I'm assuming if it's at night, Lavelle would show up in some capacity, and what happens then?
So we're not trying to do a full violence disruption program. We're not trying to apply the full Cure Violence Global model on the ground. What we need to do is find people in the community who can be trained to do the work. So that's part of the goals of this. It's to identify community leaders who can be trained to do violence disruption. So the violence disruption model is, once the shooting's happened, you kind of, the intervention point is before that. It's when you see an incident that's got potential to escalate. That's very specialised work. But what we're trying to do is start the steps towards a true, if not, a violence interruption model, so that we can, let me put it, violence prevention, violence disruption, violence interruption. So one is a very specialised skill, and we're not going to try and deliver that at this point in time. It requires a lot of training, and that's what the county investment will do. It will train people on the ground. In the meantime, we hope to have identified players on the ground in the community. So we don't necessarily see the mayor's office playing that role. We're there to seed the groundwork and create the capacity.
So how, and just 2 other questions. So how can we judge the success of this program if it's not violence and prevention, so it's not stopping the violent crimes that are taking place in the communities? It's almost like like it should just be an OCS as community outreach.
So you could argue that the Office of Community Services would be an appropriate place to do this work. This work is born out of the African American liaison and community engagement role that lives within the Mayor's office. And under, in our term, in our administration, we don't take liaison to simply be a political show up to events function. The Mayor's office over the past 5 years has sought to identify areas of need and work out programming that will meet that. And we work in very close partnership with OCS. Now, OCS, for example, the work that was done in Take Care, which is now being done out of, it's morphed, that work was started in the Mayor's office when the Hispanic liaison person worked in the Mayor's office. Yeah. That's another example of a program on the ground that was designed to be active, to achieve, concrete outcomes on the ground to make people's lives better. So we engage in that kind of work, not because we want to take over and be the health department, but we want to be able to pilot programs, we want to be able to build capacity, and we want to give that profile to the important issues, and we want to have that profile for the community.
And
Tola, did you have something to add there?
My last question. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just want to say that, for example, the work, comparable work per se, that's coming out of OCS is actually looking for other organizations to do the work on the ground. That's, I would say, the primary difference of what we've piloted. For example, she said the Take Care or Naptown Anti-Dope, or particularly No Harm VIP. We are doing the work on the ground, doing the outreach. We're not looking for other people to, per se, do it for us.
Okay, my last question, this is budgeted $80,000, which I'm understanding is almost like 75% or more is staffing. And so where does the programming come into play? If a majority of the funding is staffing, are you only using the like 10,000 or whatever to carry you through the fiscal year?
I understand our staffing budget is going to be something more like 50 to 60% this year, because we started in January, because we waited to do the assessment and get the outcomes from the county. Next year, we're asking for another $80,000 in the FY24 budget to continue the program through to the calendar year, and then run an assessment. So our budget breaks down into around 60% to staffing, and the rest is to fund our outreach efforts. So that will fund, for example, the e-gaming workshop. The budget for that, I think, was around, each of our programs, comes with a budget tag. We can share the table.
The budget for that program was $7,000? So where are you getting the programming money? Where are you getting programming money?
I don't think that's correct.
That's why we had the slide about partnership, right? Because we would love to have for example, as you said, each Cure Violence asked that, or they suggested that each site be given $500,000 or more, right? And at that time, I don't know that was the feeling of the city, but we're using whatever we can get to make a great program. I mean, we would love it, like you said, to have whatever amount of money we'd like to have, but the main thing is getting the right people staffed and making sure that they're not, what's it called, recruited to another agency, because we show the work we're doing in Annapolis that wasn't done before, and really it's not being done in Anne Arundel County. I mean, I know there's another violence intervention program that was just put up in Severn, but I mean, a lot of this came out of what we initiated from the city, reaching out to the county Gun Violence Intervention Task Force. And, just to go back to the intervention part, it's a stigma around perpetrators of gun violence. We can agree on that?
I'm sorry?
Can we agree that there's a stigma around working with people who have committed gun violence?
Yeah.
Right. Those are the people to be targeted, truthfully targeted with an intervention
But I think that's to my point, and this is it because it's 519 and at their other questions.
Yeah, we need to, but I just wanted to make one point about the e-gaming. So a large part of the cost of that was the equipment. This program's been on the books for a very long time. and there was significant investment to get the equipment in place. And we're building, this is sort of, the whole philosophy of building capacity is that now that equipment exists at Pip Moyer, the rec and parks can run those programs in future. So we had an opportunity to create investment. It's also a stepping stone to some of the skill development plans that we have to help youth move through, develop skills, and lead into potential training opportunities or entrepreneur opportunities as well.
And I'm going to obviously support this just to see the pilot through. I would hope that maybe we get together as a group and put an extra like 10 grand or something behind it so they can actually run programming, in particular with maybe older adults and a smidget bit of intervention, because I just think that's the main focus of this program, is like to stop gun violence. And as he noted at the beginning, we actually haven't stopped it. It's actually increased. And these are people that could be killed. I'm thinking of the incident with the family where it was like the mother or the son got shot, and then 12 hours or whatever hours later, they came back and shot the mother. Your whole freaking house got shot up. Like that has to be stopped. And we have to have plans in place to that, even if it's $500,000 for investment from our one time for a pilot program, just so they can do the intervention work, and we can maybe find somebody and contract out to see if we can actually maintain the gun violence. I think that's important. But I'm going to support the program, obviously, because, they are doing great community outreach work. So
If I could make one last comment just on that, is that we have not been closely meeting with the county in the last couple of months since the change of the health department leadership. We are about to start meeting and planning with them again, and we'll be planning with them through the rest of the year, because the goal is to have capacity on the ground for the Cure Violence global model. So we want to, we couldn't wait. I think the issue to point out is we felt there was a need to maintain our faith and commitment, and we had been funded. We didn't want to wait. We knew that No Harm pilot had been successful originally, and we wanted to start building that out to lead to, a coordinated plan with the county that gets us to that goal.
Thank you, Ms. Pettit. I think Alderwoman.
I just wanted to say we do have feed money in the budget.
Alderwoman.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Tierney, just one second. Before I forget, because I'm older than you. It sounded like when we were exchanging, it sounded like you were getting to the point of talking about crisis response, Alderman Gay, or did I not hear that correctly?
Not crisis response, because I think they play a different role.
Okay. Then I didn't hear.
Yeah. Just, intervention so that, we're being proactive. And as Kate mentioned, once you get on the ground in a lot of these incidents and you have the expertise, you can identify when an incident is going to take place, and you have the tools and the resources and the training to step in. And I think that's just the piece that we're missing here. But yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Oh, and just to add to that, I'm sorry, apologies. But that's again, the long-term vision is that we have a citywide strategy on how to respond, where not just the APD, but the No Harm potential interrupters would be able to go out in the community after a shooting, and then also dealing with victims of shooting. Like you said, there was a teen shot, and then the mother shot a couple weeks later, whatever, but they're going to have to, a couple hours later, they're going to have to live with that long term. And then we want to, again, change the community norm so that it's not acceptable to have gun violence in your community, even if it's Robinwood.
Thank you. Alderwoman Tierney.
I just want to say really quickly that that's exactly what I was going to say is, I wish I had a better word for this, but people see these, different efforts. I mean, we heard during the budget sessions, we heard from the police, the 6 pillars of community policing. We want to address gun violence. So I think you hit it. You hit it right. With we need a city policy, right? Right, and then under that policy, we have this and this and this. So people think it's a coordinated effort, and they're not just fragmented. Yeah. It's really important because the optics. I mean, I have that optic when we have Annapolis United, the police, and then community grants that we've given out, you know.
I agree, Alderman T, and that's one of the reasons I think we need to continue working with the county, because if we can partner with the health department to implement a health model of gun violence intervention, to me that creates a robust framework for our work. One idea, and I don't want to speak too much about this because we want to talk further with Alderwoman Pindell Charles.
And I sent an email to you today.
Thank you.
In response.
But given that we want to continue, we know Annapolis United did some great programming last year. There's funding proposed in the budget to continue that. But one of the ideas on the table is that we could do something with Annapolis United that brings these efforts together.
Yeah, there you go.
So I've spoken to Chief Jackson about a formal youth diversion program that would be run out of APD. We know that that Archie Trader had all that wonderful experience with Annapolis United. He's now over there working on re-entry. We have a great re-entry program. And this is some of the intelligence on the ground that No Harm has found. We are identifying, there's groups of young teenagers around during the day. They're hanging around. They're not at school. They're not working. They probably don't have skills and opportunities. We've seen that. And now we've started talking with APD about, can we do a real youth diversion program that our people can go in, or interrupters on the ground can go into those groups, table for discussion now to try and bring this
Is Dr. K's
together.
replacement just as passionate about this? Because he was all over this as it being a mental health, a health.
That's right. And he endorsed our decision. He was supportive of our decision to run this program, to bring this program back, and that we would continue working with the county to refine and learn and apply and look for opportunities in the future. Tony Gedden, who is the current acting health officer, she's part of this effort. She was working with us all through last year. So yes, she's as committed to this work.
I see Venn diagrams in your future.
Yes. So we hope to build that robust, comprehensive model, and exactly how we get there, we're still navigating, but that's our goal.
Can you bring those snacks back to Robinwood? Please.
I think we're done. One thing I want to mention, thank you for bringing up Annapolis Anne Arundel Financial Education Coalition. Just a tidbit. That's an organization that I started with two other ladies in the city of Annapolis exactly 5 years ago. This is April is Anne Arundel is Literacy Month, and one of them is with the Cash Campaign. And what happened was, I'm gonna be perfectly honest, they tried to kick me out of the group, the 3-person group, about a month before we were to launch it officially. I fought it, and look where we are now. Sometimes it pays to fight. Yes, sir.
I just had a quick question as well, and thank you all for your work on this very, very important issue. This keeps, you're calling this a pilot, but what happens if it's successful? What do you? I think you mentioned some of your long-term goals.
Yeah, like I said, long-term goals, we would have like in a division that would work on prevention. And then the interrupters would be focused on intervention. One of the things that was an issue with the county was, with a lot of the nonprofits, did they have the capacity? One, did they have the capacity? Had they ever had $500,000 in their operating budget? Most of them didn't, right? But then also, did they have the ability to hire ex-felons, right? And that was a concern for the county, but it's really not a concern for us because there was a second chance job program with the city that goes back about 10 or 15 years, started by Bob Agee. And even one of our division leaders came out of that program. So the city has the ability to work with people with records, even if it's felonies per se.
Well, and I'm glad to hear that you have the long-term goals, but I guess to cut to the chase, there are only two years left for this administration. Mm-hmm. If this is a successful program, it needs longevity.
Yes.
And you're only going to get the longevity by having this program be part of the permanent office department. The mayor's office is transitory. Mm-hmm. So that's right. biggest.
That's
reason.
right, Alderman Savage. And I think long-term, one of the things we are talking about for all the programs that are run out of the Mayor's office, I see, I framed this at the beginning that the Mayor's office, there's certain benefit in the Mayor's office investing in programs like this because of the profile we can bring, because of the relationship focus. But ultimately, you're right. Where does this live if a program is really important in making a difference? So one of the things we've started to talk about is that our role is around piloting and identifying areas of need, and then we work to transfer our services. So clearly the Office of Community Services is potentially a long-term home for these kinds of services, whether it's No Harm or whether it's the substance abuse prevention program that we also manage. Another question out of this, however, is how will the health department fund this work in the future? So I really have a very, my personal goal for this is at the end of the year, we take the lessons we've learned, we outline what's been effective, what hasn't, and we then develop a model that the health department can use when they want to invest in a community, another community here in Annapolis. And whether it's someone from the city doing the work on the ground because of capacity issues and the things that Tola mentioned, or whether there's an agency on the ground that can do it. But it's a model for how you get this work started. So we're really trying to build that in as we go along.
Well, and I think to my last point is I think it's supporting what Alderman Gay's point is, as far as county, and you mentioned as well, working with the county has the money, the infrastructure already for their social workers, and I guess, I think they have less on-the-ground social workers than some counties like PG County, but maybe that's a conversation we need to have with the state as well, because I think ultimately their funding comes from a lot of it comes from the state. So maybe we need to pull them in the conversation. And that's where I think the strength can come from Mayor's office is you do certainly have that strength to be able to push for those programs, and that may become a time to transition into permanence if we do find that funding. Right, because I think ultimately, we need to have, frankly, I was talking to my wife because she's studying social work right now, but, ultimately, I think we should have a number of social workers. And this sounds like a great program that would work in connection with that, right?
That's right. And one of the things I think that we've learned when working with the county is the county doesn't have the close relationships in the community. They rely on other agencies to do that. So the city has a real opportunity to be a player in that space and with the relationships that we have. So, yes.
Can we also invite them to our closed session? I think they would be critical, and some of the stuff you mentioned.
To the closed session?
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
I'd rather not for this one.
Okay, well,
We can
I think
maybe do it later, but
the
not for
school
this
stuff that you mentioned is critically important.
True, but
and
this
there has to be some.
this
okay.
is targeted. We can never spend enough time talking about people. That's just my own thing. And I'm going to channel Billie Holiday when it comes to the county versus city. God bless the child that's got his own. And if we have our own model and our own way of doing it, I think that's critical. And like you said, Ms. Pettit, when you have a model and then we can find a home for it collectively, I think that is huge. And that is a staying power that we can have for. All right, all in favor? Aye. It is 5:35, extremely productive. Thank you so much.